I remember this day so clearly. We went to see Vancouver ballet performance together. I got tickets through one of my clients at work. So we were like, let's go to the show. It'll be so fun. We went to the show. It was beautiful. And we decided to take a walk home. And Tassia is such a supportive and inspiring friend. Like, I would always come away from hanging out with her feeling so excited to sew and be creative and follow my dreams. Like, she was just the most encouraging person in my life. And so we were just talking, and it was honestly like on that walk home when that idea sparked for me. Like, I was talking about like, well, I love all the fabrics, at my work, and why is it so hard to find fabrics online? And it was kind of like, I should do that. And she was like, yeah, you should do that. And I was like, yeah, I should do that.
I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio, where we tell stories about the surprising ways that sewing impacts our lives. Have you ever looked back at your life and wondered where your love for sewing came from? Or maybe if it's changed you as a person? Ever since she was a child, Carolyn Somos found inspiration in sewing her own clothing. It wasn't just a creative outlet, but it was something that taught her how to take chances and really forge her own path. That confidence is part of what inspired her to create her own path in life as well, including opening her successful fabric shop, Blackbird Fabrics. Today we're going to hear Taylor Pruitt talk with Carolyn about how her love for sewing encouraged her to take big risks as a young entrepreneur, to quit her full-time job and put all her eggs in one basket, her shop, Blackbird Fabrics. Here's Taylor.
If you're at all familiar with the home sewing community, you probably have heard of the online fabric store, Blackbird Fabrics. A store owned and ran by sewist Caroline Somos in Vancouver, BC, Canada. Caroline is one of the sewing community's sweethearts, and she definitely lives up to that title through her contributions as a sewist herself and hosting a very popular podcast with her friend and collaborator, Helen, but primarily through running a business that gives home sewists beautiful garment fabrics to sew with. When talking with Caroline, I was curious how she started Blackbird Fabrics. And it was quite surprising to hear that having the idea of starting her own fabric store was something that happened upon her journey, not something she planned for in the future to happen. Sewing is interesting like that. Just like Sari says in the introduction, surprising ways that sewing changes our lives. And this statement rings extremely true for Caroline and her journey. I would even go further and say it was more of a connection she felt to the sewing community and her family's history that changed her life, rather than just the practice of sewing itself.
I had big dreams, and I loved to probably annoy my parents too much with all of the projects that I wanted to do at home growing up. But sewing was definitely always kind of in the background of my life growing up. And I think that's why I ended up gravitating towards sewing in my childhood. At a certain point, being surrounded by my mom's sewing things growing up and kind of taking an interest in it, at one point I just was like, you need to show me how to use this machine because I have things I want to make.
Sewing has a history in Caroline's family. Both her grandmother and great-grandmother had strong careers as seamstresses.
My great-grandmother on my dad's side was a seamstress, and growing up, my parents always said that I reminded them of her. She was also really strong-willed and a really creative woman, and she spent her career working in garment factories. And then eventually she had a children's clothing shop in Cochabamba, Bolivia, which is, my dad grew up in Bolivia. So they would always kind of tell me about her. And then my grandmother on my mom's side was also a seamstress, and she spent her career working at a tailor shop in Montreal. And she actually died before I was born.
Caroline's mom sewed a little, but it wasn't a huge focus for her. So, to Caroline, the sewing room in her house held all these pieces of history that she felt connected to and wanted to learn more about.
Boxes of her fabrics and trims lined the walls of our storage room. And I remember that's where my mom would keep her sewing machine and definitely seeing all of these kind of traces of my grandmother and her own materials, and her sewing machine was there too. Like, it just made me feel this connection to her, which was really cool because I never got to know her, so being able to feel that connection through sewing has been really cool over the years. And I was like, I want to learn how to sew. I want to learn how to use this machine that's been in this room forever.
So that's what they did. Caroline's mom taught her to sew.
Some of the first projects I made were upcycling old pairs of jeans. I really wanted to take pants or jeans and turn them into bags. So those were some of the first things that I did with the sewing machine after my mom taught me. And I think that was my excitement about it, was this idea of like taking something that existed and turning it into something new. So when she taught me how to sew, I learned how to use the machine, and then I just went for it. And I made all these bags. And then my friends started asking me to make bags for them. And I remember thinking like, yeah, sure, I'll make you a bag, but like, you have to pay me. So I would charge my friends, this was like in the early aughts, I would charge my friends like $50 to make them a bag, which is just probably too much for the quality of sewing at the time, but I felt good about it.
Could you imagine you being this 11-year-old sixth grader getting paid to make these cool bags for your friends? It's like Caroline knew at that age that she'd own her own business around sewing one day, so she better practice now.
I recognized at the time that it takes time. It takes dedication and focus, and it's not something that happens, at the snap of a finger. It takes time to take fabric and turn it into something three-dimensional that you can use. So I think I recognized that early on, and I was like, sure, I'll do that, but it's got to be worth my time.
Over the next few years, Caroline got more interested in sewing her own clothes through designing and making her own camp counselor outfits. But it was in high school that she really started to think that this could become a career for her.
In high school, I had a big project that I did where I went to the art gallery in Montreal and I picked a piece and I made a whole outfit inspired by that art and did like a whole project on it and took photos of it.
Her parents were extremely supportive and encouraging because they could see that spark in her whenever she was sewing and creating around fashion.
I was young. And that was what really kind of made me interested in fashion design and thinking I think I was probably 15 or 16 at the time, getting ready to go to CEGEP or college in Montreal and thinking, what do I want to do? I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then I think that project was what really inspired me to go to school and study fashion design. My parents have always been so encouraging of my creativity and my independence as well. I think that they saw like a spark in me when I sewed and when I made clothes. And I think they recognized that was something that I could really kind of sink my teeth into. And I did, and I loved it.
So instead of going a more traditional route of attending CEGEP, which is a pre-university experience that students typically attend that helps them inform their future studies, or they can jump right into a specialty school or trade program, which is what Caroline did, forging her own path, and off she went to study fashion in the city.
I really just kind of immersed myself in that and had a really fun time making new friends and learning those skills and dreaming about, what that would turn into afterwards. So it felt like the beginning of my life, of the rest of my life. It felt like the beginning of a career. So it was really exciting. I've always been a little bit more mature for my age, I think. So I was already thinking about what am I going to do for my life? What is my career going to be? And being able to start that a little bit early was really satisfying for me.
Throughout her time studying fashion design in Montreal, Caroline had her sights on working for a fashion designer. But things took a little bit of a turn.
So when I was in school, I thought I would start working for a fashion designer. That was the dream. And I ended up, one of my teachers told me about an internship for a textile company. And honestly, at the time, I didn't even know if I wanted it. Like I was flattered that my teacher thought of me, so I applied. And I remember going through the application process and the interview process and thinking, I don't know if I'm going to take this job. Like, it's not working for a designer. It was working for a big textile company, but a textile company. You know, I wouldn't have been doing design. It was working in their showroom. It was a summer position. And I really wasn't sure if it was what I wanted to do. And when they offered me that job, I almost didn't take it. I was working at a restaurant at the time, and I really loved working at a restaurant. I loved, my coworkers there. It was like a really fun summer job. And I thought to myself, like, do I really want to go and work for, a fabric company? It's not exactly what I envisioned, but I ended up going for it because I thought, why not? This is new experience, new, a little bit of a different thing than what I expected, but still could be really cool. And my whole life changed after that internship, honestly, because I never ended up working in fashion design. I worked that summer at that textile company, and I completely fell in love with fabric that summer.
After her love affair with fabric blossomed, Caroline was offered a full-time position at her 1-year mark of working there. They asked her to move out west to Vancouver, BC, to open a new showroom. This was a big move for Caroline, but like her past, she was always ready for an adventure. Being young and not knowing anyone in the area, and being the only person working in the showroom, she became a bit lonely and started feeling a need for a connection to a community. That's when she met her now good friend Tasia, founder of Sewaholic Sewing Patterns. Tasia introduced her to the inner workings of the indie sewing community. And with Caroline's history of making her own clothes, she knew she needed to be a part of it.
And then when I discovered it, I was like, wow, I must be a part of this. I must figure out how to have a business in this world so that I can make a career in this industry. So that was kind of my inspiration to figure out, how do I marry this like love of textiles with this love of this sewing world that I didn't even know existed. She had a popular sewing blog at the time and a sewing pattern company. And so I started working with her on the side, like sewing samples and blogging a little bit. And it was a gradual thing.
The sewing community obviously had a huge influence on Caroline. The connection to the people, the energy, and of course the practice of making was something she fully embraced. There was something deep inside her pulling her towards creating a business to serve the indie sewing community. But, of course, it did not happen overnight. Caroline started to spend more and more time in the sewing community online and in person, as well as helping Tasia out at her sewing pattern business. Over a year or so, the dots started to connect more for her.
I was working this job in the fashion industry, and I was sewing on the side for myself and blogging and helping Tasia out with her blog. And I had access to these amazing fabrics in my job. I was working for a wholesaler, so they supplied fabrics for designers. They also supplied fabrics to fabric stores, but I had access to all of these stunning fabrics, and there was a disconnect between what I saw in my job and what I was seeing in fabric stores that home sewists could shop at. So fabric stores either locally or online. At the time, there were very few online fabric stores that focused on garment fabrics, and even fewer in Canada. So, if you're Canadian, you'd have to buy fabrics from the US and then pay duties and taxes, and it would get really expensive. And I thought, like, how is nobody in Canada doing this? Like, how is there not somebody selling fabrics online? I knew that there were people living in rural communities or, areas that didn't have physical fabric stores where they could go, and they just didn't have that many options.
The idea was simmering, and Caroline just needed to put it out in the world. That's when she pitched her idea to Tasia, who she trusted most, and everything changed after that.
I remember this day so clearly. We went to see Vancouver ballet performance together. I got tickets through one of my clients at work. So we were like, let's go to the show. It'll be so fun. We went to the show. It was beautiful. And we decided to take a walk home. And Tasia is such a supportive and inspiring friend. Like, I would always come away from hanging out with her feeling so excited to sew and be creative and follow my dreams. Like, she was just the most encouraging person in my life. And so we were just talking, and it was honestly like on that walk home when that idea sparked for me. Like, I was talking about like, well, I love all the fabrics, at my work, and why is it so hard to find fabrics online? And it was kind of like, I should do that. And she was like, yeah, you should do that. And I was like, yeah, I should do that. and then we just kind of went crazy just talking about all the different things that I could do with that and how amazing it would be. And that idea just stuck with me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So it really, that spark happened when I was in the presence of someone who at the time had a business and was super creative and was super immersed in the sewing world. So I think it helped me to solidify that idea really quickly and recognize that it was a good one, because it didn't just live in my head.
Coming up, Carolyn takes us through all the phases of Blackbird Fabrics and where they are today.
If you had told me 5 years ago, Caroline, you're going to have a warehouse and 20 people on your team, and you're going to be designing your own prints, and you're going to be able to figure out how to give back to your community, and you're going to be able to create jobs. Like, I definitely would have doubted that could be possible.
If you're enjoying this podcast so far, you might really like joining in at the Seamwork community. In addition to this podcast, every month we create new sewing patterns, a video class, and a monthly digital magazine. When you become a member, you get access to all of that each month, plus you can hang out and talk in our private community forum. We're all really welcoming, and it's a great place to ask questions, post projects, or share your thoughts. Right now, podcast listeners can get a special discount of 50% off the unlimited plan. That gets you access to our full catalog of over 150 patterns, and you can download as many as you want, whenever you want. It's only $90 for a whole year of patterns, plus classes, videos, magazine articles, and access to the private community. Check it out at seamwork.com/go/podcast50, or look for the link in the show notes.
Caroline was determined. She had a deep knowledge of the fabric industry, and she had the support of her friends in the community. She wanted to start sooner than later, which meant taking an unconventional route as a young entrepreneur. Caroline quit her job, putting all her eggs in her dream fabric store basket.
Yeah, so that would have been probably spring 2014. And then that summer was when I quit my job and kind of spent a few months building a website and doing all of the things that I needed to do to get started. So it was a few months. I think I was ready. I was ready to have a new adventure and start something new. Mentally ready, probably not financially ready, but I really wanted to do it.
Obviously, there are a lot of ways to start your own business. Some people start slow and like to save up to support themselves. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, some people find investors. But Caroline fully believed in her idea, and she took a little riskier approach to how she'd find the money to buy inventory to supply her store.
I was not in an awesome place financially at the time, to be honest. I wasn't the most responsible with money. I was in my mid-20s, and I had like a line of credit, and I had about $4,000, I think, available on there that I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to use to start my business. And I didn't have any other savings. In hindsight, like, I wouldn't recommend it because, it was not the most responsible thing to do, but I just had so much like passion and so much drive. And I believed so much that it was a good idea that I just took that risk. And of course, I'm happy that I did, but yeah, financially at the time, I probably didn't have enough, saved up to take me through. I was really lucky that when I launched my business, people bought fabrics and I was able to continue on. And it was a very slow build after that, with a lot of highs and lows and a lot of challenges. And I'm super lucky to have a partner who supported me through that. emotionally, but also, he had a full-time job. So I knew that I had that a little bit more security, knowing that I had somebody in my life that could support me if needed.
So with the more, let's call it, low-budget start in mind, Caroline knew she needed to keep costs minimal and efficient, which meant she did literally everything for her shop.
Version 1.0 was me, just me in our apartment. We had a 2-bedroom apartment in the west end of Vancouver, and it was a pretty small place. So I convinced my partner to let me run my business out of our master bedroom, which was the biggest room in the house. And we ended up sleeping in our tiny little spare room, basically just room for our bed. And so for the first 2.5 years of my business, it was just me in this bedroom with all my fabrics, cutting orders. I did everything. So I cut the fabrics and shipped them. I took the product photos. I did, all the social media stuff, newsletters, website. I was a developer and a shipper and a photographer all in one day. And it taught me a lot about figuring things out, realizing that I can do whatever I set my mind to because I have no choice.
Which also leads into why it was an online shop as well. Not only does having an online store give you a wider reach to more customers, but it means you don't have to pay rent on a physical space either. Caroline wanted to make sure she could connect and serve as many people as she could, so creating a store where she could do that was a priority for her.
I love online shopping, and I felt like I could reach a wider audience and serve more people being online. There were fabric stores locally, but I knew I didn't have a lot of money, and Vancouver, rent in Vancouver is really, really high. So I wouldn't have been able to afford to have a brick and mortar store starting out. So it was kind of my only option at the time. But I also just knew I think that the hole that I was trying to fill was online because I knew there weren't that many options. So that's really what I decided to focus on.
I remember my first purchase from Blackbird Fabrics in 2015. I was new to the sewing world, and as a graphic designer, seeing a beautiful website dedicated to garment sewing was exciting. I remember being blown away by the attention to detail that her website had, and I loved how niche it was. I would have never have thought that it was ran by a one-woman show. Over time, Caroline started releasing more and more fabric, especially harder to find fabric for home sewists, like Cone Mills denim and cool, trendy fabric you'd find similar to garments in ready-to-wear stores. And at that time, Blackbird was really one of the only online fabric stores marketing themselves this way. But Caroline wanted to keep pushing the needle and forge her own path.
I think in the early days, we were one of the few fabric stores that were doing what we were doing. So there wasn't a lot to compare ourselves to, And over the years, there have been more online fabric stores popping up. And so now I think what I am trying to do, or what my goal is to try to figure out how can we continue to fill a hole? How can we continue to give our customers something that they can't find elsewhere? And so continuing to innovate and figure out really what are people looking for. I think that the sewing world has evolved and changed. People's style has evolved and changed. Fabric preferences have evolved. So being able to continue to sort of forge our own path in that way, try not to do what everyone else is doing, I think that's been a huge focus of ours over the years. It's just so cool that we're at this point now where we really can do things differently because we have more power to, source fabrics directly instead of working through wholesalers, and design our own products and just continue to kind of innovate and try to do things a little bit differently.
Blackbird Fabrics was a hit. People started to feel connected to it, and the sewing community loved what was being offered there. And with that kind of success, Caroline knew having more people to help out would not only be ideal, but also essential for growth.
I think early on, I didn't really know what growth would look like. I had an idea in my mind, I'll hire a couple people and it'll be so great. And, we'll be able to keep up, and it'll be, we'll just be a cute little team, and it'll be awesome. And as I started hiring, I realized like my business just kept growing to accommodate like the people that I had working for me. So, I'd hire one person, we'd grow a little bit more. Hire another person to keep up, we'd grow a little bit more. So we just kind of kept growing that way gradually.
Caroline currently has about 20 people working for her. And out of those 20 people, a few are her first hires back in 2016.
My first hire was Natasha, who is still on my team. It's been almost 4 years. And she is amazing and hilarious. And honestly, my rock at work. She's fabulous and just like so hardworking. And she's done so much over the years. She started off packing orders and doing customer service. And then now she is our office administrator, and she kind of takes care of all the behind the scenes stuff at the office. But she was my first hire. And then I hired Laura, who's also still on my team and absolutely wonderful. She does all of our buying and sourcing, and she has an amazing eye and really understands my vision for what I want in terms of the fabrics that we carry. So they were my first two hires, and they're still with me now. And over the years, since I hired Natasha, we kind of slowly hired. And then in the last year, we've grown a lot. So we went from a team of 8 people about a year ago to a team of 20 now. And a lot of that has been on our fulfillment team, just trying to keep up with the volume of orders that we're getting, but also growing our marketing team. That's the team that does all of our photography and our newsletter and our social media and everything like that. And just figuring out how to kind of set up our company in a way that works for us has been really, really fun and interesting over the years.
With a team of now 20, you can probably imagine how much Caroline's role has had to change over the years. From doing literally everything in the company to now big picture planning and budgeting.
And my role has changed a lot over the years as well. I used to do everything. So it was really hard to slowly but surely kind of let go of all of the nitty-gritty stuff in the business. And now I'm thinking about big picture planning and budget and HR and systems and processes. I'm not behind the camera. I'm not cutting fabric. I'm not doing all of that nitty gritty stuff. It's a lot more big picture stuff. And also just trying to think like, what are some exciting new projects that we can do that are going to keep us fresh and new? And what's next for our company? And how do I create a really positive and healthy and enriching work environment for my team? I'm employing 19 people. I'm so honored that 19 people are working for me and that I can pay their wages and that I can support them in their life, So my focus is more on like big picture business stuff, and also just making sure that my team is happy and that we're creating like a really, really good work environment for them. And trying to figure out, how do I grow this business in like a balanced, socially responsible, sustainable way, And also, how do I give back to my local community and the sewing community that has like given me so much over the years? Because I feel like the support that we've seen over the years has been so incredible. And now I'm at this stage where I'm like, okay, I need to figure out like, how can I give back? How can I continue to innovate? But also, how can I kind of put something back into the world?
Hearing Caroline speak to her team, but also her customers, you can tell that the sewing community is still at the forefront of her mind when it comes to her business. Even though her role has changed throughout the years, her ultimate goal and purpose of starting Blackbird Fabrics holds true. Owning your own business has to be extremely difficult. Not only are you serving your customers, but you're also cultivating a place that you hope people like to come to every day, which adds a lot of layers to leading a team.
I think the biggest lesson that I've learned and that I'm still learning is that it's not personal. I think like my business is my baby, and I care so much about every part of it and every person that works for me and every person that buys from us. And I feel so connected to my business that anything that goes wrong or any challenge that we have feels so personal. And figuring out ways to put a little bit of a distance between my business and my heart and myself has been really important. And it's not that I'm stepping away from the business. That's not it at all. But it's kind of like a mental and emotional shift that I've had to have, because over the years, it's so easy to take your work home with you and be thinking about it constantly. And I don't think I'll ever be able to not think about my business constantly, but realizing that my business is one part of me, but it's not all of me, and if something goes wrong, it's not necessarily a reflection on me personally. I think that has been a huge lesson. So kind of realizing that my business has kind of become its own entity and that I can be separate from it too. And I've developed a much thicker skin over the years. With our podcast too, I mean, with Love to Sew, we get all kinds of feedback from people, positive and negative. And that was really hard at the beginning, but over the years, I think over time it gets easier and you kind of realize like different perspectives are so important. It's so important to understand and listen and like absorb other people's thoughts and perspectives. And at the end of the day, like you can learn so much from other people. So I try to look at it that way. Like I'm so lucky that I have customers and listeners of our podcast and people in the sewing world that are willing to share and be vulnerable. And I can learn so much from that.
Hearing Caroline talk about this really struck a chord with me. And I think it really speaks to her personality and how she's been able to make so much magic happen with her determination, openness, and willing to learn. It also makes me think about sewing and how it is super similar to this process as well. We all have to start somewhere. We try, maybe we get it right the first time, but eventually we're going to mess up. Then we look at what we did and then try again. It's a constant revolving process, such as life. And ultimately, where Caroline and Blackbird Fabrics is today has far surpassed her initial idea of what she was expecting it to be.
I think that I imagined having a little shop and few people working for me, and that I'd call it good and that'd be amazing. And if you had told me 5 years ago, Caroline, you're going to have a warehouse and 20 people on your team, and you're going to be designing your own prints, and you're going to be able to figure out how to give back to your community, and you're going to be able to create jobs. Like I definitely would have doubted that could be possible. It sort of happened. I don't get a lot of opportunities to sit down and reflect on it and think about like what that means and how amazing that is and how special that is, because I'm so in it, But I definitely, if I had kind of envisioned what owning a fabric store would be like, I don't think I could have even dreamed that it would be this, where we are today.
Looking back to where Blackbird Fabrics started out, it didn't just start when Caroline learned more about the indie sewing community. It started way back when she learned about sewing and making repurposed bags for her friends in middle school. It started back when she learned about her family history and how sewing was very present in it. It started when she pivoted her personal focus from fashion design to textiles. It was this building passion of hers throughout her life, and it makes total sense that she is where she is now. Owning her own business that helps her connect to her hobby and a community that she loves dearly.
Part of it is like when you make something, and as sewists, I think we experience this a lot too. When you make something that you really love, like when you make something with your hands and then you end up with this thing that you can share with others and that other people can also appreciate and love and celebrate with you, I think that there's this instinct to want to do that again and again. And I think that also when people in your life are saying like, ooh, like I want one of those, or like that's a really exciting thing. And also just that independence, like having your own business means like you're your own boss, you make your own rules. And I think that that's really appealing to a lot of people. So when you have a hobby that then you can picture turning into a business, I think like that's just like a human thing to do, figuring out how can I share this with other people and how can I make this something that can sustain me, as a career perhaps. So I think that's where it comes from. It's like that desire to share, maximum sharing, maximum delighting in a hobby with other people.
That was Taylor speaking with Carolyn Somos, and you can find her at blackbirdfabrics.com. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the Seamwork community, and you can find us at seamwork.com. If you have a story to share, send us an email at podcast@seamwork.com. We'd especially love to hear stories from those whose experiences often get left out of the conversation, whether because of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, or any other reason. Again, that's podcast@seamwork.com. You can find us on Instagram at Seamwork and Seamwork Video on YouTube. We'd love to invite you to join us at seamwork.com. We have an amazing community there, as well as new sewing patterns and classes each month for members. Podcast listeners can get 50% off our unlimited membership, which gets you unlimited downloads from our library of over 150 wardrobe-building sewing patterns. Just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find that link in the show notes. And if you like this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice. It really helps other people to find the show so they can hear these stories too. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with you soon. I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio.